Well, Kath, it is so exciting to have you here today on Real Hope Conversations. Whenever we get together and we have a chat about God or just about life, I always walk away feeling as though I have drawn from your wisdom and your experiences in life. And I always feel really encouraged. And so I know that for those people who are listening or watching today, that this is a conversation that will encourage them, and they will also learn from your wisdom as well, which is the whole point of this podcast, is to journey together in this journey that is life as a Christian in a world that is broken and in need of experiences of God's love right now. So I'm so thankful that you are here. But before we dive in to talk about rest, can you share a little bit about who you are? There are people who are listening who've never heard of Kath Henry before. So can you share a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, I'd love to. And it's such a privilege just to chat with you, Abby. And I appreciate the shared wisdom that we gather as we do podcasts from lots of different people. So, my background is in nursing and in midwifery and intensive care. So, they're the areas I have worked in. I'm married, and my husband and I church planted, and we're both ministers as well. And we also really enjoy volunteering as chaplains for the Hope team, which is wonderful. We have two beautiful adult children, and one of our children, our daughter, is married, and I have two wonderful grandchildren. So I
That's
get to
special.
enjoy them. And the things I really love is being outdoors, meeting with friends, um, sharing faith. Yeah, and just being as real as we can and vulnerable with each other are the things
Mm,
I really value.
mm.
Yeah.
I so agree with that. I think that we're in an age or in a world where accountability and transparency and vulnerability are things that, I don't know, connect us greater with one another.
Mm.
And after the last 2 years where we have been desperately seeking connection because we have been separated, I think that that is only more, that idea of transparency and vulnerability is only more so um, needed in the world today. So I really love that you pointed that out, because that is so true for us as human
Mm.
beings. Um, but on a side note, let's dive into what we're talking about today, which we're talking about rest. And I know for me, when this topic was suggested as something that we look at in the devotional, I kind of like exhaled, because I feel like
Mm.
after the season that I have been in, I think the season that many people have been in with the pandemic and the world as it is, crises, a lot of dissension and division in communities and in family, it can become overwhelming and exhausting, not just physically and mentally, but also spiritually. So the idea of rest
Mm.
is something that I think we all know we need, but sometimes we don't actually create the space for us to have that time to step away and to rest. But can you share a bit
Mm.
from your wisdom about why rest is so important for us as Christians, particularly spiritual rest?
Mm. And I think, Abby, it is the thing we can rest physically, but sometimes we're not resting spiritually.
Mm,
And I've been thinking a lot about that actually, because it's more about that type of rest is more about what's happening deep inside us in our thoughts and our spirits and our journey. And I think it's so important for us because it helps us actually shift our way of being and thinking. And we know a
mm,
lot more about the brain these days and how it functions and the importance of, that problem solving frontal lobe and how we can very quickly shift into this sort of fright, flight, freeze that are important responses when we're under pressure, but they're not the responses that help us to live well and more fully and with more meaning. And so we actually know when we rest and rest deeply, and spiritual rest can help us to move away from just functioning in that hurried fright flight kind of way to being able to think more fully and more meaningfully about what's happening around us,
Mm,
happening to us. And it is like taking a deep breath. So it is as important as breathing. And and just if without it, to live with restlessness in a world that's already so restless
mm.
is going to have really serious consequences, I think, in the long term. So I
I
actually
think,
think it's about healing too, isn't it?
mm, yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's actually interesting when you talk about that because I was just thinking about a period where I had the opportunity to rest, and I had 5 days with my kids were at their dad's place. I actually just had time to myself. But even the idea of, like, I was physically resting, um, but
Mm.
the idea of mentally and spiritually resting meant that I had to sit in my emotions and my feelings. And
Mm.
I don't, that's a
Yeah.
scary place to be sometimes, is sitting in that and processing that. And I definitely identified for myself that I use busyness um, to distract myself from that spiritual and emotional rest, because I think sometimes spiritual rest actually means facing some things with God in those moments. And I,
Mm.
like, when I was faced with this opportunity, I was like, oh my goodness, it's actually, this is good, this is good rest, but it's also a resetting, which sometimes means I had to let go of a lot of things in order to come out
Mm.
refreshed. And I think sometimes that rest, that idea of rest, doesn't necessarily mean we don't do anything. It actually can sometimes mean that we
Mm.
take the
Mm.
opportunity to sit in those emotions and those feelings and those, and processing those situations with God that we have gone through. Um,
Mm.
but it is that
Yes.
hard step to take the time.
Yes. 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 And sometimes that can be a bit confronting because maybe we're frightened of that. But I think it's really important what you say, Abby. It's not, sometimes I think when we go to a place of rest, we're a bit frightened of what will come up because we'll have to just deal with it alone. Whereas
Mm,
really there's a difference between being alone and solitude, which is a part of rest,
mm,
where we're actually sitting with God and
yeah.
giving those thoughts as they come to God.
Mm,
And I was thinking about, when we rest, we have this idea, like if you say to someone, take the load off your feet, come and have a seat here. And then if you imagine where if I offered you a cardboard box and I said, come and sit on my cardboard box, come and have a rest. And you would say to me, well, is that cardboard box empty? Because if that's empty, then I just know I'm going to fall straight through. So, but if it's filled with something that's sturdy, then you'd say, oh, that's great. I'll sit on that. And I think sometimes uh, it is also the fact that where we rest is in our relationship with God. And
mm,
so, if that is just an idea and in our lives it's still a cardboard box that's empty and just an idea to us, then it will be worth our while thinking about how do we fill that relationship so that we
mm,
can really lean into that and rest into that. And I think
mm,
that's why God offered us that idea of a Sabbath rest. So there's a book that I love that's by, I've got it here actually, John Marcoma, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. I don't know if you've read
yeah.
it,
Yeah.
but gosh, it's helpful. And there's some thoughts in there to help us think about how do we build up our sturdiness in relationship with
Mm,
Jesus to be able to kind of imagine leaning into his arms that he takes the weight of it all so we
mm,
can just rest. And I think it doesn't mean that the circumstances change. It doesn't mean that things become easier, but it does mean that we have that moment of rest. And for me,
mm,
it's a little bit like this image of as a midwife when I'm with women who are, and still sometimes I go as a support person for women, when they're labouring and there's a break between the contractions, there's this moment where we say to them, you know what, this is the time you really need to rest. This is your opportunity. It's in a rhythm.
Mm,
Your contractions come in rhythm, and here's your moment to rest.
mm,
And then it's so interesting where they choose to lean, and they'll often choose to lean on the shoulder of the person who they love, who's there to support them. And I
yeah.
really, that for me has been an image of leaning into God in between the groaning that it talks about in scripture,
Mm,
that we, as we connect with our world, we will groan and we will feel the weight of it. And it's not saying that will go away, but
yeah.
there's a simplicity, and there's a kind of a silence that can be in the rest, just being present, a letting go, like you said, Abby, of the things
Mm,
that have weighed us down, and those groanings of our family and our world and this uncertainties, and we can just let them go to rest there
mm,
and be
mm,
just recognize that there's a comforting, loving presence with us.
mm.
So I think that's the healing part of the Sabbath rest that God wanted us to discover, because it's like that
Yeah.
shalom word that says it's about a wholeness. It's much more than just sitting still. And
Yeah.
actually, it doesn't even necessarily have to be sitting still. People can rest while they're walking in nature.
Mm, yeah.
You know, sometimes if you just stop and sit still, it's too hard. You don't feel you've rested at all.
So true. That is so true. And I do like, for me, certainly, a place to exhale is the ocean. As soon as I see it,
Mm,
I feel like I like exhale out and everything that I'm carrying just gets released. And I think that that certainly is a
mm,
place for me. Whereas I know there are people in my life that like to rest in solitude and in quiet, and that's how they um,
yeah.
exhale and release everything. So it just, I guess, it depends on the way that God has made us and wired us um, to find our
Yes.
rest. One of the things that I loved about the devotional that you wrote was the passage that you actually referred to, which was Matthew 11:28 to 30. And you looked at the message translation, which I actually love because I feel like um, it's speaking to us, to every single person, um,
Mm,
no matter where you're at. And I love that it's like, are you tired, worn out, burnt out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you will recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. And what I love about that is
mm,
that it identifies how we're feeling, and feeling tired
yeah.
and worn out and burnout on religion is okay. Like, those are feelings that we
Mm,
have, but it's what we do with those. And as you said, it's where we find our rest. But it's finding our rest in God, that's the solution. But then also, it's a learnt thing. That's what I feel like this implies, is that it's learning from God how to rest, and He will teach us how to
mm,
live in that. For you, what do you draw from this passage?
mm. And in different seasons for me, it's been different things, but I love that those words like you, rhythm of grace. And I think
Mm,
it makes me think about music that has rhythm, and grace being the notes that go over the top. And there is something called a grace note. And
yeah.
I love the idea that there's music and the rhythm needs rests. It's in the same way as
Mm,
when we're talking to each other. There's a rhythm in our language and we take a breath. And so it's kind of like, oh, okay, it makes sense, and it makes a symphony when people
mm,
together, or each instrument takes its rest. And so then I think about, well, what does it look like for me in this season that I'm in to take rest? And it doesn't, it looks different at different times. So it's kind of, I feel like God's saying, I want you to come along with me, because actually, and in the passage it says, you'll discover yourself again. So it's
yeah.
discovering God, but as we discover God and who He is, and rest in that, and and all that's been done in the saving work of Jesus Christ, and we rest in that, know that we don't have to strive to fix all of that, all of our lives ourselves. He shows us our true self, the wonder of who we're created to be, and we find a peace about who we are that we can rest with him in and just be there and go, wow, okay, then I can bring my best self to this
Mm,
day, because I'm actually discovering more about who I am as I discover about God, and I can rest into that and move with a greater
mm,
hope and peace and
mm,
joy. It brings all
mm,
those things as the Spirit does that work in us. And so, yeah, it does mean finding that for ourselves. And so for me, I have found something really helpful is actually at the beginning of the day, I start it with God, because I think um, I heard someone told me they did this, and I thought, oh, I would just love to do that every day. The first thing I do is I wake up, I look out the window, and I just say to my Lord, good morning. Hey, God, hi. And somehow just that simple act
mm,
connects me with my God for the day, instead of me getting up and hurrying into the things that immediately start to crowd into my mind of what I've got to do. So it's that simple. It's just saying, I want to be with you, Lord. And at the
mm.
end of the day, I take some time to, as I tuck into bed, along with talking to my pillow and saying, I'm coming. I just try and reflect a little bit on my day. And I stop to say, think about where did I see God? And who showed me God today? Or where did I see God in creation? And how did I connect with him? Or like the scripture says, where was there a time where I tried something actually that was ill-fitting? So I can just think,
Mm,
actually, that's not me or my best self, or where didn't I bring my truest self? Just hand that to God and say,
mm,
Lord, I think I wasn't my truest self here, or this was ill fitting, and help me with that. And then to really give the day to God so that I've had time to reflect. And then I think I have found, as I do that more regularly, then the longer times when I stop, or when I'm unexpectedly forced to stop because perhaps I'm unwell or something's happened, or we're suddenly finding ourselves, the world might be opening up, but someone might test positive and they're having to have some time where
yeah.
they're aside and in their own place for a period of days, that then everything doesn't crowd in the same way. All the things that I've stuffed into my life, in that
Mm,
it doesn't seem as overwhelming
mm,
to when I'm actually forced to stop when I don't want to, because I've had these times where I've chosen and I've given that to God. And if it comes up again, I can go, I trust you again with that, Lord. And it
mm,
doesn't feel as weighty or as restrictive as it did.
mm,
So it's a really ancient spiritual practice that I've kind of put my own words to, but it's something that has definitely helped me. And I think we're
mm.
allowed to put our own words to things, or sort of describe them a little bit more that feels more like us. So
Yeah.
they're the things that have helped me.
I love that, Kath, because I think for me, my thing is that I run really hard. So I run really hard. I run through the seasons. Feelings and emotions get pushed down, and I just keep pushing through. And I'm sure if you're listening, there are maybe people who are exactly like me. And so when it comes to rest, like I mentioned, it's overwhelming when I have the opportunity to rest, because it's this, oh, I have this
Mm,
opportunity to to process those things that maybe I didn't want to because I was running really hard. And so to make a daily practice, I can see how that would um, make those times where I do have rest probably less overwhelming, and giving me time to connect with God really intentionally about the day and to rest in Him at the end of the day. Like, I really love that idea, even though it may be ancient, still it still has value for us today, as we're going through
mm,
our daily walk. One of the things I want to touch on is your the description of rhythms of grace. And I've read a book by Rebecca Lyons, which is called Rhythms of Grace. And it talks about these different 5 rhythms that we can put into our life that actually give us space to connect with God
Mm,
greater. So it's rhythms of rest, rhythms of renewal, rhythms of creativity, all these things that actually allow us to rest in God. And it's not that rest on the couch binging Netflix. It's actually resting in renewing our minds, in renewing our spirits, in renewing our bodies, in our creativity and the gifts that God has given us. For you, apart from your daily practices and nature, how do you apply like rhythms of grace or rhythms of renewal or rest to your life on a daily basis or on a
mm,
yearly basis?
mm. It's really interesting because I was just saying to someone the other day that I really feel like one of the ways that God continues to renew my mind is as I'm writing or doing something actually for someone else. So even writing the devotions, or I've just been asked to speak on hope for a youth camp, and so I just think when I'm asked to do those things and I look into something more for someone else, I'm just like, wow, God is so kind, because I can actually feel it kind of renewing my thinking about him.
Mm,
And so I'm really grateful that that's been part of my life. But I think we do that even in natural ways, like for our children, when we want to share our faith with them in some way, that we'll read something in a different way or look at it differently, or reading a kid's book. That's a Christian
yeah.
version of the Bible even has helped me in those times with little people to renew my mind, or allowing people to ask me questions and to sit with them, and to look at the scripture together has helped me. Journaling is something that I started many years ago, and I don't do it all the time, but I do it periodically, and that helps me with the rhythm. And I find I would always say I'm a baby cellist, but music has been important to my life, and um, I really appreciate just sitting and playing my cello and learning something about the cello. And I think because there's something about the sound of it that helps me feel all those things I was talking about before.
Mm,
It's like it's teaching me, and even enjoying other people's creativeness. I love when people show me the crafts they've made, or when I have a try at something. Not that I'm good at it, but I recently, with a friend, when we were in lockdown previously, we got a pottery kit and did it together, and just creating something with someone else.
yeah.
It was really lovely just to see what was in them that came out through their hands as they moved on this pottery. And it just reminded me of God being the great potter and how he's molding our lives. And
Mm,
everything becomes a metaphor if we're walking in those rhythms of grace and seeing God in it. And so I think it can be so many different things at different times. That connection with people, just being
yeah.
able to um, take a moment to walk out at nighttime and look at the night sky
Yeah.
and remind myself that I'm very small and God is very big.
Yeah.
That can add to the rhythm of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes
I
it's the simplest things. It's the
yeah.
simplest things.
I actually I have a new puppy, and so obviously we're going outside a lot.
Ah, yeah.
And in the middle of the night, before I go to bed, that's kind of my favorite time to go outside with him because he's doing whatever he's doing. But I stand there and I look up at the sky, and there's just this reminder that my God is so much bigger than anything that is
Mm,
playing out in my life, anything that is playing out in the community or in the world. He is so much bigger than that. And he has a plan and a purpose for us all. And I think it's that taking that, and it's literally I'm out there for 2 minutes, but it is that rest in that knowledge of him as well, which I really, yeah, when you said that, I was like, yeah, I do that, and I'm really enjoying that. I don't know what I'm going to
Yes.
do when my dog can go outside by himself. I'll be going out with him anyway.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it'll become a rhythm and you'll just do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
So
it'll be part of the symphony of your life. Do you know what I mean? It'll
that's
be
it.
the music that carries you.
I love that
Yeah.
description, the symphony of my life and the music. I love the way that you actually connect with music. And in your writing, whenever you write about music, it makes sense. Those grace notes and those breaths that are in music. If you are musical and you're listening, you understand that there needs to be that rest in order for the crescendo to happen, or in order for there to be emotion
Yes.
and meaning in the music and in the symphony. And at the same time, those breaths, those moments of rest actually can add more meaning to the next season for us and the next chapter, or what do they call it in music? The next
Phrase.
sequence?
The next phrase of music.
The next
Yeah.
phrase.
The
There
next
we go.
phrase of
I knew it
music.
was something
Yeah.
that applied. I love that, Kath, and I love the way that you can visually describe that, which has connection for me, and I know for so many others. For those who are listening or watching right now, what would your encouragement to them be as they think about rest in their own lives and their own rhythms of rest and rhythms of grace um, for their life and their daily life?
Mm. Mm. I think I'd have just one suggestion, that you feel assured today that there's a God who loves you more than you love yourself.
Mm,
And if you could just imagine for a moment that you can just lean into his shoulder, pop your head on his shoulder, and whatever comes to mind in a sentence, just say that one sentence to him. And it might just even be the word help.
mm,
And that would be enough. If you don't feel like there's any time in your day to do anything else other than to lean into him and say, this is overwhelming, help me, then that would be the beginning of finding rest in God.
mm,
And
mm,
I think it doesn't have to be more than that today. But as you do that, and as you think a little bit more about wanting to build that friendship with the God who loves you, then I think you will find more and more in scripture as you read it. It'll jump out to you that says, wow, I could find this rhythm in my life. I could try that. And
mm,
it won't be all fitting for me. That would fit well. And I'd like to try it. And I would just say, give it a go. Just give it a
mm,
go. And I'd say that you're allowed to. Sometimes there's something that's in us that says, oh, I'm not allowed to rest myself. I've always got to be on for my kids, on
mm,
for my work, on for the people around me, on for the world. And I would just say, you're allowed to rest.
mm,
You're
mm.
absolutely allowed to rest, and your God would like you to.
Kath, as always, it is a joy. I feel like I've exhaled through this conversation as well. Um, and certainly as we start the year, as we're now currently in February when this goes to air, just getting into that daily practice of rhythms, actually, I think is going to help us through whatever God has in store for
Mm.
2022 and for the years to come, and getting into that practice now. It's never too late to start getting into a practice of rest. But thank you for your encouragement and your wisdom, and also sharing personally about your practices of rest, because I think sometimes there are so many suggestions out there, but we just need to hear them all to figure out what works for us for our daily practices. So it's a blessing as always to sit down and chat with you, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you so much more this year on Real Hope Conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abby. I love chatting with you, and I love the way you share your heart. Thank you.